Daniel woke to a house wrapped in an unusual stillness, the kind of silence that clings when something vital is missing. The bedroom felt off too empty, too precise. Emily's side of the bed looked untouched, as if she had never been there. He tried to convince himself she had stepped out early for a walk or some quiet time alone, but a sinking weight pressed against his chest as he moved toward the kitchen. The sharp scent of cold coffee hit him first, followed by the sight of a single folded note next to a mug. Her handwriting, soft and familiar, made his stomach twist. Even before reading, he knew the words would wound. The note was brief but loaded. Emily needed space. She felt lost, overwhelmed, unable to keep pretending everything was fine. She didn't place blame or demand answers. She only asked for time to breathe, hoping he could understand. Daniel read the note again, hoping he might find some hidden meaning, some clue about what he could fix. But the words were steady, final, not the end of a marriage, but the quiet collapse of the life he had thought he shared with her. He sank into a chair, clutching the paper as though it might vanish in his hands. Memories of the past months ran through him. Late nights at work, conversations avoided, the slow, almost imperceptible drift between them. Signs had been there, small yet unmistakable, and he had ignored them, assuming love would endure on its own. Now the house felt hollow, and grief settled deep as he stared at the empty chair where Emily once sipped her morning coffee. He didn't cry or shout. He barely moved, as if the volume of his life had been muted. Time passed, unmeasured, until the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the silence. At first, he almost ignored it, thinking it was a delivery or a neighbor, but it rang again, insistent and deliberate. When he opened the door, he froze. Standing on the snow-dusted porch was Clare Whitmore, Emily's mother. Snow clung to her hair and coat, as though she had arrived straight from the airport. She didn't demand answers, scold him, or voice blame. Her eyes carried both concern and understanding. "Daniel," she said softly, "I heard what happened. You shouldn't be alone right now." She stepped inside with a calm presence that offered comfort without obligation. The simple act of her being there brought a strange relief. She glanced at the note on the table and rested her hand lightly on his arm, not pity, but care. She had always treated him like family, and that quiet kindness now felt like a lifeline. She asked if he had eaten. He hadn't slept. He wasn't sure. She moved gently through the kitchen, opening blinds to let pale winter light spill in, creating a sense of motion where everything had felt frozen. She didn't demand explanations. She simply let him exist in her presence. Daniel found himself speaking, sharing fragments of the story, not because she pressed, but because the silence with her felt safe. Her words were measured and simple, grounding him without forcing false hope. She reminded him that people sometimes step away when overwhelmed, not because they no longer care. She reminded him that love bends before it breaks, and that bending doesn't always signal an end. Her calm voice softened the edges of his grief. For the first time since reading the note, Daniel felt a flicker of clarity. He still didn't know where Emily was or what she wanted, but he no longer felt entirely alone. From the moment she unpacked her small suitcase in the guest room, the atmosphere in the house changed. Curtains were opened, lights turned on softly, and the faint scent of meals replaced the bitterness of worry. Claire moved through the house with quiet assurance, not rushing, not imposing, simply reintroducing a rhythm Daniel hadn't realized he missed. She cooked modest meals, but their warmth, the simple act of sharing food, brought back a sense of life to the house. Whenever Daniel tried to apologize for being a burden, she brushed it away gently, reminding him she wasn't there to judge, only to ensure he didn't unravel. One evening, after a quiet dinner, they tidied the kitchen together, and for the first time in days, Daniel laughed. A small, genuine laugh that surprised him. Claire noticed but didn't comment, letting him keep that moment. Later, he sat on the couch, staring at a framed photo of him and Emily from their first summer together. She sat silently beside him until he spoke, admitting he didn't understand how things had deteriorated so far, how work, long hours, and avoided conversations had chipped away at their connection. Claire listened patiently, then shared an unexpected truth. Emily had always been strong, maybe too strong for her own good. She carried burdens quietly, not wanting to weigh anyone down. Claire regretted having taught her daughter that strength in silence. Daniel realized he hadn't lost Emily's attention, but her trust in being vulnerable with him. The drift hadn't been sudden, it had been gradual and unnoticed. Claire made him tea and sat across from him. Not as a mother-in-law, not as a visitor, but as someone who knew what love looked like when it had stopped being nurtured. She explained that love doesn't collapse suddenly. It fades when neglected, unnoticed. Emily stepping away wasn't a sign of finality, but of care, a pause before deeper hurt could occur. Her words studied him with clarity. Days passed. He didn't feel healed, but less lost. Claire filled the home with small conversations, stories of her own mistakes, quiet moments of wisdom and regret. She laughed at his burnt toast, teased him for misplacing dishes, reminded him it was human to falter. She hummed in the kitchen, prepared breakfast with quiet ritual, handed him a plate with a smile. You can't fix a marriage on an empty stomach. Daniel smiled at her mix of wisdom and silliness, feeling lighter in her presence, not romantically, but simply humanly, through everyday tasks, folding laundry, sorting photographs. Claire offered truths Daniel hadn't admitted to himself. Love needed tending. He had stopped, assuming it would care for itself. Her gentle guidance showed him how much he had overlooked, and slowly he began to understand. He shared fears he had buried, spoke of doubts about their future, and Claire listened, patient and honest, never judgmental. Small moments became anchors, a shared laugh, a reminiscence, a quiet nod of understanding. He started to see that Emily hadn't vanished from his life entirely. She had only stepped back. Daniel considered ways to rebuild trust, to reach across the distance, to tend the love that had quietly faded. He recognized the warmth in Claire's presence, a subtle, non-romantic power born of empathy and understanding. Days blended into a gentle rhythm, Claire's presence filling the emptiness. Daniel opened up more than he thought he could, sharing thoughts, worries, and memories he had tucked away. Claire offered her stories, her mistakes, and her wisdom without judgment. Gradually, the weight he carried became lighter, stabilized by someone who understood without lecturing. Her careful words guided him to reflection, helping him see his own neglect and the quiet signs Emily had sent all along. One afternoon, while sorting old photos, he lingered on a beach picture of them together, smiling under the summer sun. He confessed his fear of having taken her for granted. Claire didn't chastise him. She reminded him recognition of mistakes is the first step toward change, and it's never too late to act. Emily's need for space didn't erase their bond. Her words resonated, encouraging Daniel to think about small gestures, tiny steps toward restoring trust. Daniel felt a subtle warmth, the kind that comes from empathy and long conversations. He reminded himself that his heart still belonged to Emily, but he realized the importance of guidance, presence, and steady human connection in moments of crisis. Claire had noticed subtle changes in Daniel too, though she never mentioned them directly. She continued offering guidance, keeping their conversations grounded in understanding and healing, always careful not to overstep. One snowy evening, after a long discussion about life, love, and past regrets, Daniel and Claire found themselves sitting side by side on the couch. The closeness was unintentional, a quiet consequence of trust and deeply honest conversation. Daniel felt the weight of it, a slight tightness in his chest, while Claire remained composed. gently maintaining boundaries without shaming him for feelings he couldn't fully name. In that moment, he recognized how human connection, even the platonic kind, could awaken emotions long suppressed. It reminded him of the loneliness he had endured and how desperately he had needed someone to truly understand him. That night, Claire urged him to think clearly about Emily, to separate the comfort he felt in her presence from the love he still carried for his wife. Daniel nodded, attempting to untangle his emotions, aware of a faint tension but also of a profound gratitude. For the first time since Emily's departure, he allowed himself a quiet hope, not desperate, but mindful, reflective. He understood that repairing a marriage would require honesty, reflection, and personal growth. A few days later, Claire asked him to consider what he truly wanted, not what he thought Emily might expect, but what he wanted for himself and his marriage. Daniel admitted he wanted to be a better husband, someone Emily could rely on, and someone who would not let silence or avoidance destroy their connection. Claire encouraged him softly, without pressure, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a clear sense of purpose. He was no longer merely surviving. He was learning, growing, and preparing for what lay ahead. Still, despite the careful balance of comfort, awareness, and personal responsibility that Claire had nurtured, unexpected emotions sometimes surfaced. One evening, as they shared a quiet reflection, Daniel became aware of the subtle closeness between them, the brief brush of hands as they moved photographs, the calm warmth of her presence. Her voice, her patience, and her steady nature had become a source of reassurance amid his emotional storm. It surprised him, as he had believed his heart could only belong to Emily, yet human emotions are rarely simple, and connection often appears in unforeseen ways. Claire, ever perceptive, maintained her boundaries gracefully, ensuring that admiration or comfort was acknowledged but understood responsibly. Their conversations deepened, exploring love, mistakes, and second chances, revealing insights into resilience and the value of caring for others as a reflection of self-care. Daniel began to confront his own failings and recognize the ways he had unintentionally hurt Emily, learning how to make amends through presence, attention, and understanding rather than grand gestures. Through Claire's guidance, Daniel not only reflected on his wife's absence, but also gained insight into how to welcome her back with patience and care. Claire noticed his sincerity and celebrated his growth quietly, aware her role was temporary but vital, a bridge between despair and recovery. Each day added layers of patience, clarity, and self-awareness. Daniel no longer feared his emotions or the complexities of human connection. He could distinguish comfort, support, and love, realizing that healing required both heart and mind. Just as a fragile sense of stability returned, the phone rang. On the other end was Emily, her voice soft and tentative. Daniel felt a rush of hope and anticipation rather than fear. The time spent with Claire had prepared him to listen, reflect, and approach Emily with patience and genuine care. They spoke cautiously at first, testing the waters of a conversation avoided for weeks. Emily asked about Claire's visit, and Daniel admitted her presence had been unexpectedly comforting. He spoke honestly about his reflections, his mistakes, and his efforts to nurture their relationship. Emily listened, her pauses weighted with emotion, gauging the sincerity of his words. Daniel absorbed every nuance, aware that rebuilding trust required patience, honesty, and small, consistent acts of care. Hours passed as they navigated their emotions, the outside world fading. Relief mingled with anxiety, relief in hearing her honest voice, anxiety in knowing that the real work of rebuilding their bond had just begun. When the call ended, both felt a subtle shift, a seed of hope planted. In the following days, Emily returned home. The house felt warmer, not because of grand gestures, but because of deliberate, meaningful interactions. They settled into a quiet rhythm, cooking together, sharing meals and talking with gentle intimacy. Daniel noticed the small moments he had previously overlooked and engaged fully in the shared life they were rebuilding. Emily, too, expressed her needs and hopes with honesty. Slowly, laughter returned, alongside the emotional closeness that had been absent for months. One evening, as snow fell outside, Emily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, their hands intertwining naturally. Claire observed from the doorway, smiling softly at the success of her guidance. She had facilitated their reunion without overshadowing the love that belonged solely to Daniel, and Emily. Daniel reflected on his journey from heartbreak and solitude to growth and clarity. Guided by Claire's steady presence, he understood that love demanded constant attention, communication, and mutual care. Their reconciliation was not instant, but a gradual rebuilding of trust and connection. Claire's visit had not replaced his wife, but acted as a catalyst, teaching him patience, empathy, and resilience, and giving him courage to face difficult truths together. Daniel and Emily began creating new memories while honoring the past, committing to a thoughtful and attentive partnership. As winter gave way to spring, laughter, confidences, and emotional reconnection became routine. They had survived absence and distance, learning to thrive together through honesty and renewed dedication. When Claire finally left, Daniel and Emily saw her off with gratitude. Standing together in the doorway, hands entwined, they felt hope blossoming. Challenges would come, but they had laid the groundwork for a stronger, more understanding marriage. Daniel realized that love could endure absence, reflection, and mistakes. True partnership required listening, patience, and care, lessons he would carry for life. As the sun cast a warm glow into the living room, Daniel and Emily sat close, sharing a quiet smile. They had reclaimed not just their love, but a shared understanding of what it truly meant to be together. The hardships remained, tempered now by growth, compassion, and the gentle guidance of someone who had cared enough to step in when needed most. Daniel understood that love's most important part was not perfection, but presence, being fully there for each other through silence, hardship, and tender moments. And in that calm, heartfelt evening, he knew they were ready to continue their life together, stronger and more connected than before.